Welcome to The Joy Factor. Now, here's your host, therapist, life coach, and yoga teacher, Julie Hansen.
Hello, and welcome to the Joy Factor podcast. My guest today is Jeff Harry. He is an international speaker who shows individuals and companies how to tap into their true selves to feel their happiest and most fulfilled, all by playing. Jeff has worked with Google, Microsoft, Southwest Airlines, Adobe, the NFL, Amazon, and Facebook, helping their staff to infuse more play into the day-to-day. Jeff writes, while we spend most of our time pretending to be important, serious grown-ups, it's when we let go of that facade and just play that the real magic happens. Fully embracing your own nerdy genius, whatever that is, gives you the power to make a difference and change lives. Jeff believes that we already have many of the answers we seek, and by simply unleashing our inner child, we can find our purpose and in turn help to create a better world. Welcome, Jeff.
What's up? I'm excited about this, Julie.
I love having you, and I feel like we're kindred spirits already.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to ask you to start us off by telling us what the term joy factor means to you personally.
Ooh, joy factor means to me doing the thing that makes you come most alive. Like literally playing and feeling the way you felt when you were a kid, where you were fully present, fully in the moment, fully in flow. That's what I think of when I think of joy factor.
Wonderful. Why is play so important, especially now?
Because we live in a world of uncertainty. And the fact is that we are struggling because, as you know, adults get fixated on results, right? And expectations are the thief of joy. And what happens in play is you're able to navigate that uncertainty. You're able to embrace taking leaps, not knowing how it's going to go, but really, frankly, focusing more on enjoying the process and being in the moment rather than focused on like achieving or getting a certain result.
And I'm sure our listeners are going to want to know, how have you even managed to keep this playful attitude and to keep yourself, there's a little bit of pressure when you make your living helping other people learn to play. And then here comes a pandemic and everything shuts down.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I went through, just like everyone else, the roller coaster, right? This is the roller coaster of emotions. One thing that actually really helped me, and here's a perfect example of something of like choosing to do something that scared me at one point and then now I start playing, is, at the beginning of the pandemic, just like everyone else, I was binge watching Netflix and watching Tiger King and, trying to consume as much information as possible, thinking that would help. And then at some point I got really bored. And there's some power in allowing yourself to get bored, because that's when all the mischievous ideas that you have, like when you were a kid, you're like, ooh. So the inner child voice that came up was just like, hey, you should start making videos. And I was like, oh, I don't want to make videos. Like, I don't like how I sound. I don't like how I look. Like, what would people think? And I was having like this inner turmoil. And it was just like, no, dude, you should try to make something. Then I was like, no, I'm going to binge watch Netflix. So I did that for a few more weeks. And then I realized, like, this is not healthy. It's like eating way too many Cheetos. And after a while, you're like, oh, gosh, this is too many. So I was like, I want to do something creative. So let me just make one video. It was no big deal. No one's going to watch it. I made one video. And it felt really good. And it actually helped me to process everything that was going on, right? From the pandemic to Black Lives Matters to everything. There was all these different roller coasters. And I just kept making videos. And I did that in March of 2020, right? Right as the pandemic was starting. And by March of 2021, I had made like 400 videos. And then on top of that, it inspired me to hop on a bunch of podcasts and start talking more about play. And I happened to like join like over 150 podcasts. And I did this all by playing. And the only reason I share this is something that I chose that I was really scared to do when I eventually did it was probably the thing that helped me best get through the pandemic. It helped me process, and really address some of my mental health. And also it just was super fun. And when I started primed the day by starting with play, it set the tone for the rest of my day. And I started seeing everything as play.
Well, and you're also mentioning something that is key in my mind. Well, first of all, doesn't Tiger King seem like it was a lifetime ago?
It seems like so long ago. So many of these shows, right? All this stuff. You're like, oh my gosh, when was that? Because it feels like it was like 5 years ago because of all of the other roller coasters we've gone through, right?
But yeah, this other thing about, you're describing, well, I had all these reasons not to make a video, and the process of learning to do that. And it gets to this idea we were talking about earlier about resilience, right? And learning these new skills and really having a playful attitude alongside it.
Right. And I think something also that's really magical about play, and this is why I advocated for much, is like I see play as the opposite of perfection. Perfection is rooted in ego and shame and constantly avoiding failure, like being scared actually to fail. Like I don't want to make any mistakes. While what is play? Play is built off of experimentation, curiosity, awe, this sense of like wonder, like, ooh, let me try this out and see what happens. I remember I had a colleague or former colleague who worked for NASA, and she worked on the Mars rover. And one of her main jobs was to have it fail. Find 25,000 different ways in which it was going to fail, because when they sent it 150 million miles away and it failed over there, they wouldn't freak out because they have already experienced that level of failure. I think we are so scared to fail, and we even were trying to do the pandemic in a perfect way, which was hilarious because nobody knew what. So anyone that was giving advice during the pandemic was like, oh, were you here during the last pandemic? Because if not, what are you talking about? Like, no one knows what to do. Like, even our experts, no one knew. And if we just admitted, like, none of us know. And right now, none of us know. Like, how are we going to navigate uncertainty? I don't know. How are we going to like grow your business or, find your next job? I don't know. But the more you're willing to embrace the play aspect or the play-oriented mindset, that growth mindset, the more likely you will succeed, because you're willing to experiment and try and fail, and you're not wedded to results.
You're not wedded to results, right? And so you've got that flexibility and you've got that capacity to, like you're saying, you can make mistakes, you can go back and try again. But the important thing is, to keep that imagination alive. Take us back a little bit, like pre-pandemic, if you can remember that far back. Does feel like forever. How did you get started with, how did you turn this into your career?
Oh, the Batman origin story? Oh my goodness. Okay, I'll share you the short version. So, remember the movie Big with Tom Hanks?
I do.
Yeah, so I saw that movie when I was in 3rd grade, and he was playing with toys for a living, and I was like, what? You can do that for a job? I was like, oh, dude, that's what I'm doing. So I started writing toy companies in 3rd grade, and then I just kept writing them. And they would never get back to me, but I kept writing them anyway. And eventually I got into the toy industry, when my 20s, and it was like, have you ever gotten exactly what you've always wanted and then been so disappointed when you arrive? But like, that's how the toy industry felt. Like there was like no play, no toys, no high fives, no kids. Like it was just like cubicle walls and just being like, I'm just going to die of meetings. Like this is just so painful. Right. And I remember leaving that and being like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with my life. And I left New York, where I was moved to the Bay Area, and I found a job on Craigslist teaching kids engineering with Lego. And basically it was just playing for a living. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. But it was a part-time job. I was paying $150 a week. It was like a joke, but I was just like, dude, I want to do this, and I'll do this for as long as I can do it. And then while we were doing it, like, I was like, oh, I want to make this into a career. Can I? And I asked like my boss at the time, can we do it? And he goes, yeah, but I don't know how to do it. And I was like, okay, we'll figure it out together. And we all just figured it out. I think it was only 7 people at the time, but we just started playing. No business plan, no idea what we're doing, just testing stuff out. We picked cities we thought were fun. We picked people we thought were fun, and we just grew it. And it grew into the largest Lego-inspired STEM organization in the US. Like, it went from like 7 people to like 400 people. And the whole time we had no idea what we were doing. We're just figuring it out. And during that time, we got the attention of Silicon Valley, and they were like, hey, do you do team building events? And we're like, yeah, of course we do. No, we didn't. But we just said yes to everything because that's part of the play thing of just like, of course, we do it all. We do special events, and we would just say yes to stuff and then just figure it out. And then I ended up running team building events for the next decade with all these tech companies, Facebook, Adobe, Google, all of them, the ones that you mentioned. But I found at all of these companies that at the same time that they claimed innovation, they claimed taking risks, they claimed creating psychologically safe work environments, they weren't really doing it. Or at least they weren't doing it to the extent that I thought that they could do it. So I created Rediscover Your Play really to talk about psychological safety in the context of positive psychology and play, and be like, how do we eradicate a-holes from the workplace? How do we eradicate toxicity? How do we address toxic masculinity? How do we address inner critic? And how do you have your staff tap into their inner genius? Yeah. And I just have been doing that ever since,
Well, and how do you deal with toxic people in the workplace? I mean, everybody wants to know.
I mean, there's a whole other, I can get deep into it. But really when it comes down to it, when I tell people, it's like, culture is defined by the worst behavior tolerance. So every leader needs to be asking themselves, what's the behavior we tolerate that's the worst? And does that fit with our culture? And then if it doesn't, then we really have to address that. And then when I talk to employees that have to deal with like either a toxic boss or a toxic individual that's like their colleague, then I'm like, all right, this is all about like setting boundaries, right? This is all about this idea of really figuring out and organizing with your staff, with the other people, and being like, what are we willing to tolerate and what we're not? Like an example of that would be like, if in a meeting, this person dominates 80% of the meeting, I would talk to all my colleagues and be like, over the next 3 to 6 months, we're going to start taking up more space in those meetings. We just are, and I'm going to get your back. And if he cuts you off, then I'm going to get your back and make sure that you get to say what you have to say. So that would be one of the first things. But then I would also like confront the toxic person directly, because a lot of times they don't even realize how toxic they are. They don't even know sometimes if they're doing it. And then be like, hey, I know that you are trying to get your point across, but right now you're losing a lot of people. Is that your intent? Right? Like, don't attack the person, but address the intent. And then frankly, if they're still like, I'm going to do whatever I want, then go to your boss or your boss's boss and be like, and you have to talk from a standpoint of not complaining, but from the standpoint of like, hey, Chad right now, I know that he brings in $1 million a year, but he also got 5 people to quit, which cost us $1.5 million. So that's actually affecting your pocketbook as well as mine. Are you okay with that? And when you start to talk from that pain point standpoint, that is really important, because then it's just like, why do we have this person here if it's not actually helping the team get better and also helping us just make more money if that's the main goal, right? And then lastly, and this is probably the hardest one to address, is like you really have to address your own inner Chad, your own inner critic, because there's a reason why that a-hole or that toxic person triggers you, is because part of you believes some of the things they're saying. And once you realize, you're like, wait a minute, I should be Chad's boss. Wait a minute, I should be getting paid more than Chad. The next time he says something super disrespectful to you, right there, you can be like, Chad, don't ever talk to me that way. And then what happens is not only now does Chad not try that with you, but it shows to everyone else like, oh my goodness, Jeff just stood up to Chad. I want to stand up to Chad. And then everyone starts setting boundaries. So then it has this ripple effect. And then that person can't act that way. And then they have a choice to either leave or they change their behavior. And that takes time. That takes like 6 months to a year, possibly, maybe longer, depending on how toxic your situation is. And then if you've tried all those things, then you're like, man, it's still not working. Then you have to see whether this is the right place for you to go. And this is why people are dealing right now, or while companies are dealing with the great resignation, is because they were not ready for the amount of people that were like, this is not worth it anymore. It's not worth it for me to be here.
No, life's too short. And, right alongside that, you talk about what's unnatural about the 8-hour workday. And, I'm curious.
Oh, dude.
Tell us what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think what's interesting is, so Robert Owen in like 1819 came up with the 8-hour workday, right? 8 hours of work, 8 hours of leisure, 8 hours of sleep. But then it wasn't implemented for a really long period of time. Like actually in like the 1860s, 1880s, a lot of unions, or what was going to be unions, were advocating for this 8-hour workday. But then eventually in like 1925, Henry Ford of Ford Motors was forced to implement the 8-hour workday. And a lot of people don't remember, but this was during their pandemic. Their pandemic was like in the 1920s. And this was right after, because a lot of people were dying on the job. I think it was like 1 in 10 people were dying in factories. So it was like, why do I want to go to work? So he wasn't getting enough staff. So he was forced to implement this 8-hour workday, that on top of it, then he also doubled people's salaries, because again, just like now, right? People weren't paying enough. And it was just like, what do I need to do to get people to come in? But then since 1925, no change, no change. And studies have found that you can only do deep work for like 4 hours a day. I think it's like 3 hours and 56 minutes in a given day. And even I think Adam Grant wrote about this recently in New York Times, that, hunter-gatherers back in Stone Age, 15 hours, 15-hour work weeks, 15-hour whole work week. So we're like, why do we have this arbitrary number of 40 hours? Why are we not instead focused on like, what's the most important work that our staff needs to do? And I don't really care how much time you devote to it. I care more about what is you can actually create with that. And we're coming from more of a place of humanity where, like, studies have found a 4-day work week, you're more productive than in a 5-day work week. When you start seeing all that, that's where the joy comes in, right? You want your staff to do well. A really amazing play mentor of mine, Kevin Carroll, would say the future's where people are having the most fun. You can't have fun if you're working 50, 60 hours a week at something that you don't even have like purpose towards. But if you are showing that you care about your staff and you care about their joy, oh, dude. And then you're like, hey, do your best work, do the work that is your zone of genius work. People are going to have so much more fun, and they're going to be so much more productive, and they're going to come back to work.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And I think that it seems like it's connected to time also, because I think there's a lot of people are poor estimators of how much time it's going to take to complete a task. So if you're looking at in the workplace, there's 168 hours in the week. Right. And a lot of times we're kind of put on that hamster wheel and told, all right, this is what you should be doing before work, during work, after work, on the weekends, and just that constant expectation that your time will be filled. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about, how play, the value of taking the time to play, and even what you would recommend or suggest to somebody who really just hasn't felt very playful lately.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of times when people are like, well, what are the benefits of play, right? Well, the opposite of play is depression. That's what the doctor of play, Stuart Brown, would always talk about, right? And how did we get through the pandemic? Oh, we watched Netflix and Hulu and YouTube and all these other things. We consumed a lot of content. What was that content of? People playing. People were playing, right? The greatest inventions that we've ever made in life come from play, right? If you look at if you read the history of the Wright brothers, it was fascinating because they were these bike mechanics just messing around, right? And they were doing it because they were just interested. It was fascinating to them. A lot of people don't know that right next to them, I think it was Chrysler, had invested over $1 million at that time, which is probably like much higher, like in hundreds of millions, in scientists, PhDs, engineers to create a flying machine at the same time as these bike mechanics. Who got there first? The Wright brothers. Why? Because they were playing. They were just messing around. So like when we talk about like survival, right? We talk about love, we talk about sleep, we talk about eating, but I think play's just as important because it's, it's what animals do in order to figure out how to survive, right? They play hunt, they play fight, they do all these things. So, if I was going to give two suggestions for how people can play more. One of them, I like doing this. I do this with people that I coach. I ask them this. I would have you reach out to your closest friends, right? 3 to 5 of your closest friends or family, like whoever you really connect with. And you ask them these 2 questions. Why are we friends? like what do I do for you? Why are we connected? Right? Because I think a lot of times, another way of asking is like, what value do I bring to your life? Right? Like that would be the question. Because a lot of times we forget what impact we have on people's lives. And then the second question I would ask is like, when have you seen me most alive? And another way of asking that is like, when have you seen me most creative, most playful, most myself? Right? And when you ask those 2 questions, what value do I bring to your life? And when have you seen me most alive? And you get the answers back from like 3 to 5 different people, and you hear back, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that's what I do for you. Oh my goodness, that is when I'm most playful. That is when I'm most alive. That's when I'm most creative. And when you hear this, you get all these ideas. And then you go back to those same friends. You're like, I need to play more in these ways. Can you help me? And you get like a play accountability partner, and that person will help you to play more. So it's a lot. For me, it's not like, hey, grab a hula hoop and then go play. Like I define play as any joyful act where you forget about time, where you're fully in the moment, you're fully in flow. So that can be anything. I once was working with a client who was like a lawyer, and she's like, I don't play at all. I haven't played ever. And I was like, well, what do you like to do? And she's like, I like to take people that hate each other and I get them to agree on something. And then I was like, well, tell me more. And she was telling me more. I was like, that's your play, So play there's a broad sense of that. So that would be my first suggestion. But then my second suggestion would be, you can't play when you're in an anxiety-ridden state. You can't play when you're angry. You can't play when you're sad. So you first have to identify, okay, what actually calms me down? What actually soothes me, right? Is that like taking a shower? Is that going for a walk? Is that dancing in costume in my house? So that's what I like to do. It's like making videos. Like, what is it to do that actually calms you, right? And then once you're calm, I challenge you to get bored. And what I mean by that is stop binge watching Netflix, stop looking at YouTube like I did, stop doing all these things, because we are inundated with more information in a day than most people in the 1950s got in an entire year. And most of that information is telling you to buy more stuff on Amazon, binge watch more Netflix, but don't play, don't be yourself, don't pursue your weird thing. But when you can block it out, and I'm talking about like blocking it out for like 10 minutes to 30 minutes a day, not a lot of time, right? And if you're like, well, I don't have that much time, look at your phone. You're on your phone 5 hours a day. You can block out 10 minutes, right? And when you allow yourself to actually be bored, all of a sudden, all these nerve-sided ideas come up, these ideas that make you nervous and excited, and you just have to pursue one of them, right? Any of them. Like, I want to email that person, but I'm so scared to email that person. Oh, I want to like start a podcast. Oh, I want to create a video. Oh, I want to like reach out for a job that I know I'm never going to get, but I'm going to apply anyway. Like when you take that act, regardless of of whatever happens, forgetting about the result, you simply reaching and applying to that job you've never applied to and you were scared to apply to, or reaching out to that person you were scared to reach out to, just doing that act starts to almost lay down new neural pathways in your brain, because it shows you like, oh, it's not that scary. Oh, this is what it feels like to dive into the pool of uncertainty. And what is fear? Fear is just false evidence appearing real, right? So you just realize, oh, it's not that. Oh, okay, well, let me try more. Let me try more. And that's what I did with the videos. And that's all of a sudden how I like making these videos were just for me. But now it's taken me on this adventure that I'm now at here with you. So like, this is what happens when you allow yourself to truly play and take those risks.
Love it. And what you're saying about, being bored, letting yourself get bored, to just unplug and let yourself be right here, right now for a minute to see what's there. Because if you are, everybody's plugged in, and, it's really easy to lose sight of, who am I?
Yeah.
Right. Versus
Yeah.
who am I supposed to be according to what everyone else is saying.
Yeah. Like when you get into that doom scroll on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, it's hard. I mean, I've had that where when I'm consuming so much, I can't create, because then I'm looking and I'm like, well, everyone else's life is so amazing and mine is horrible, and then you just don't want to make anything. But if you block out that noise, oh my gosh, I forgot who said it recently, but someone who just won an Emmy was like, she was speaking when she won the Emmy, and she was like, we are told all the time that you constantly have to update people about your life. And there's something magical about just not doing that, of just disappearing for a little bit and just working on the thing that like brings you a lot of joy. And when it's ready, then releasing that, right? Like we forget, like Picasso and all these artists would like go paint for like a year and no one would hear from them. And now we feel we have to update people every 2 minutes of what we're doing. It's just like, dude, it's not that big of a deal. Most people are not paying attention to you. Mm-hmm. They're just not. They're not paying. No one's paying attention to anyone else. They're all focused on themselves. Right. So yeah, there's something magical about that.
When you mentioned the hula hoop, it makes me think of a college that I worked at back in Dallas, and we would have 15 minutes of fun.
Oh.
And so there was a whole fun committee.
That's awesome.
And like when it was 15 minutes of fun, they sent out a campus-wide email, and I decided to show up for one that I was really the PE coach. Showed up, this big, tall PE coach. He literally had a boom box that I don't know if he had it on his shoulder, but he had it in his hand. And then his other hand, he had a stack of hula hoops. And so that was the whole thing, is learning how to hula hoop. And it was 15 minutes. I learned how to hula hoop. I did not know how. I then purchased a hula hoop, and it just kind of created this energy. So sometimes it is, yes, you definitely need to unplug. You definitely need to like black out the noise, right? Like there's just too much of that. But I think, a lot of people are struggling to kind of figure out, well, how do I get, sometimes it is that social connection that can really bring play alive and kind of let you relax and have some fun. Do you have any tips or strategies for folks who maybe are just kind of not interested in too much socializing, but who are still looking? Maybe you're introvert in the crowd who really is, needs some of that energy from other people, but not too much. How do you find that these days?
Well, I, again, would challenge them to get bored so they can start to hear what comes up for them, right? Because it's different for each person. That introverted person might be like, ooh, I feel like writing. Like maybe I want to write something, or maybe I want to write a blog, or maybe I just want to read all of these books like in a row, and I want to like just consume all this really awesome information. Like I don't want to. So the thing I'm really careful about is being like, this is how you should play. This is your way, because everyone has a different way of playing, right? But then as part of those nerve-sided ideas that might come up, something's going to come up where it's just like, ooh, well, I have been wanting to go to like this happy hour event, either online or in person, but I've been putting it off for a really long period of time. Everyone has the thing they've been putting off. And it's just like, well, we just explore that. Just explore. I was coaching someone the other day that was like, I don't want to talk to anyone, but I just want to go to a movie. I haven't taken myself to a movie in forever. And I really want to go to this premiere. And like I coached her in helping, like, what is that feeling going to be like? Ooh, how is that going to be an adventure? Ooh, how while you're there, can you take more risks? Oh, well, I'm already at this movie premiere. Maybe if I see someone that I really resonate with, I'm going to go say hello to them or just wave hello. And that's it. Not more than that. Like something small, always small steps. Nothing like grandiose. Like play doesn't have to be grandiose or performative in any way. It just has to be the thing that brings you joy. So what brings you joy? And that's part of the reason why I like both the Get Bored challenge as well as the other challenge of asking those two questions. But another thing someone can do, and this is like a game I played while I was in Portugal that's really fascinating. I learned this from my friend Desiree. You can ask this with curiosity throughout the day. And you ask yourself, ooh, how can it get any better than this? You know, right? So like you ask that, say, for example, like today, right? Like I started the day by like making a TikTok video. Ooh, how can it get any better than this? Then I hopped on this, like work session with two of my friends and we were just laughing the whole time. Ooh, how can it get any better than this? Then someone reached out to me from some TV station, wants to interview me. Oh my gosh, how can it get any better than this? Now we're having our podcast interview. How can it get any better? I don't think it can get better. But you see what I'm saying? So like you're priming your brain to start to look for ways in which it can get better. Now, what we usually do, right, is something bad happens. And I forgot which professor was talking about this, but you experience 60 seconds of basically feeling this feeling, and then you can let that feeling go. But what happens is like, we start to have a bad day and then we start to prime our brain to look for other patterns like, oh, bad things come in threes. Then guess what? You start looking for all the other things that that are going to be bad. But if you're willing to shift your day and ask yourself when you're in a crappy mood, how can it get any better than this? With curiosity, not with expectation. Like it better get better, but instead, ooh, how can it? You'll start to look for those options. And it's amazing what your brain can do when you really ask a question with curiosity.
Yeah, curiosity is definitely that is the balm. That is the compost. Like that's everything, to be able to have some curiosity.
And that's where all that energy that we were talking about, that connection, because when you have that curiosity, you're more likely to then seek connection, right? Someone just told me this recently. I forgot who it was. I think his name was Chris Bent, but he talks about how whenever he feels like consuming, he first asks, instead of me consuming right now, instead of me binge watching this show, who can I connect with? Because I'm clearly looking for some type of connection. Can I call my mom? Can I call one of my friends up? Let me do that before I consume this entire show. Because what you potentially are looking for is connection. Before I doom scroll on Instagram for the 50th time today, what else could I do? Could I go on Instagram and write a bunch of friends and be like, hey, I really appreciate you? Same platform, totally different feeling when you're on there.
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to hair care. A product that works wonders for coarse hair might make fine hair limp and dry. My thick, coarse hair has always been challenging to style, and I've tried lots of products over the years. It wasn't until I tried Prose that I was finally able to have a personalized routine that I can honestly say fits what my hair needs and makes me love the finished product. Prose makes custom hair care that's effective because it's personal, and it's made just for what your hair needs. First, Prose starts by asking about you as a person with their in-depth consultation, and the questionnaire I completed to get started with Prose was really helpful. Next, Prose analyzed all my answers and determined what unique blend of ingredients should be in every product of my custom routine. Together, Prose got all my hair goals covered, including their guidance to wash my hair less and still keep it looking great. My favorite product, hands down, is the custom Pre-Shampoo hair mask. It's highly concentrated and really gave my hair instant results. I can tell that it hydrates and repairs my hair because it feels smooth and it makes styling a snap to do. As a carbon neutral certified B Corp, Prose is an industry leader in clean and responsible beauty. All their ingredients are sustainably sourced, ethically gathered, and cruelty-free. They're also the first custom beauty brand to go carbon neutral. If you're not 100% positive Prose is the best hair care you've had, They will take the products back, no questions asked. Take your free in-depth hair consultation and get 15% off your first order today. Go to prose.com/joy. That's prose.com/joy for your free in-depth hair consultation and 15% off. So when you are struggling yourself, feeling playful, feeling joy, what is it that steals your joy and how do you get it back?
What steals my joy? When I take myself too seriously, frankly, when I'm trying to be right, when I'm trying to be perfect, when I'm in that perfectionist mode, that really steals it. When I'm leading with ego, right? Like I just had an epiphany the other day that I was like, I was going to make this video, but then like a whisper, my inner child was like, don't make that video because that video is driven by your ego. So even asking myself the question, what's driving me right now? Is it play or perfection? Is it ego or curiosity? Is it scared of failing or embracing failure? Like what's driving that decision? That actually really helps. But then I also talk a lot about toxic positivity. Like I am not about just being happy for happy's sake. I think you should feel whatever feelings that you have. Like there's a magic in joyful sadness. And what I mean by that is like, my dad passed away in 2015 and I was at the funeral and his 4 brothers who had not seen each other in like over 20 years show up, right? They haven't seen each other since their mom died. So I'm feeling grief and sadness, but I'm also feeling joy and gratitude that they're there. And in Inside Out, they talk about that. You can feel both feelings. You should actually feel all the feelings. So if you're feeling sad, allow yourself to feel sad. Like you shouldn't like, oh, it's time to play right now. Like I said earlier, you can't play in an anxiety-ridden state. So allow yourself to feel sadness, allow yourself to feel anger, allow yourself to feel whatever feeling, as Tuesdays with Maury would always talk about, fully feel that feeling and then you can let it go. I think a lot of times what we do is we try to tamp that feeling down. We try to like hide it and we're like, I'm not sad. I'm not angry. I'm fine. And it's just like, nah, dude, like that is where it becomes toxic because then you're pretending instead of just owning that feeling. And then once you own that feeling, then you can let it go because there's something really beautiful about sadness that we should embrace. We should embrace all the emotions because that's what living is, right? Like you can't feel full joy if you can't allow yourself to feel full sadness. Mm-hmm. Do you want to ride on like the merry-go-round that goes in a circle? Or you want to ride on the roller coaster where you feel all of the feelings?
It's true. Well, and so what about your inner child? Like is that a daily conversation you have? Do you have any kind of regular ways that you check in with that part of you?
I mean, I'm very clear about when I've named my inner critic. My inner critic is named Gargamel, and Gargamel has a top playlist that my friend Marcia Chandor taught me that every inner critic has like a top playlist of like the 5 best hits. And the 5 best hits are usually like, you are horrible. No one wants to listen to you. No one loves you. You're a failure, like all those ones, right? So I can recognize when Gargamel is speaking. So when I notice Gargamel speaking, then I'm like, oh, thank you, Gargamel. And you acknowledge it. Sometimes I text my best friend, Dana, and I'm like, Gargamel's saying these mean things to me right now. And as soon as I acknowledge it, my inner critic gets quiet. And then I start to hear my inner child because my inner child's the one that typically is much quieter and is usually like, you got this. You can do this. Hey, how about we try this out? Like it's quieter, but it's exciting. It's playful. It has joy. Like you can hear it. And I realize when I've been listening to my inner critic so much, then I'm like, okay, I need to do something. Like I need to go for a walk. I need to create a video. I need to dance in my house. I need to do something, like you said, with the hula hoop, some 15-minute thing that just gets me out of my head instead of me giving so much power to my inner critic. And once you're able to like start to give yourself that certain level of love, that inner child starts to show up more. You start to hear it more. And when you're asking questions like, how can it get any better than this? And like, what makes me come alive? And you ask that to yourself, your inner child starts to show up. And it's like, oh, I've been waiting to tell you, Jeff. Oh, let me tell you right now.
That's excellent. Tell us. So one of the things that I loved about your website was your play people list. And tell us about that. Like, what's going on there?
So I was once inspired, and I actually made that in like less than a weekend. But I was like, there's not enough people that know about play people, like people that actually work in the world of play. They're either play facilitators, they're play coaches, they are people that run like team building events, they're people that are like, I know a pastor that uses play to address mental trauma. Like there's all these people doing stuff around the idea of play in the world, right? So I put together like a list of people that like featured, like Kevin Carroll and Dr. Stuart Brown and Peter Gray and my friend Gary Ware, just like really dope, amazing people, right? And then I even made another list, like a play people book of like 200 people around the world that are just doing play in a variety of different ways, right? And I did that because like those people need to be highlighted. There's, especially now, oh my goodness, now when like we're full of such uncertainty, this is the time where play is so vital for adults. I'm not even talking about kids. I'm talking about for adults to get through this. Play is actually what has helped us cope through all of the chaos that is here right now. And play is also the way in which we can solve so many of our problems. Like I truly believe if we approach climate change from a play-oriented standpoint, we could address stuff. I feel like if we played more, we could figure out, the political divide. I bring up this story once of this. There were these two gangs in Chicago that were just straight murdering each other, like just huge animosity, huge beef, had it for so long. And then I think 2 kids died. And they were like, enough is enough. And they built a playground where those 2 kids were. And they did it together. The 2 gangs did it together. And since then, not as much, because they built something together. They created something together. They took some tragedy, something that was sad, right? Beautiful sadness, and turned it into something. And they played to create something. So play has the ability to heal the world if we're willing to like explore it, right? And that's frankly what we need right now. We need a lot of healing. I think there's a lot of trauma we haven't addressed. There's a lot of mourning we haven't addressed. There's just a lot of stuff that we've just had to like suck up. And like, that's just crazy. That's just irrational. And really what we need to do right now is to be spending more time figuring out how do we come together. And I think play is one of the answers.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, just going back to, there have been past pandemics, right? And we can look to kind of see, well, what are the things that have helped? Nobody knows right here, right now, exactly what's going to happen next, but we can look for signs of recovery. We can look for, signs in our community. And, anytime we can make meaning out of something, which is what it sounds like the playground builders were able to do, right? Like they were able to make some kind of meaning out of that tragedy and what had happened.
And it's the hope. It's the hope during the hardest times, right? It's that small glint of light in the dark, hallway that like, that's what we need to seek out. We can focus on all the bad things that are going on. Hey, we're doing such a great job at that. But at some point, it's really like, yeah, I'm fascinated by that. I mean, that's why like I go on platforms like TikTok where I'm watching people create. It's almost like a playground of people just making really fascinating things. Teachers teaching about history they can't teach at school. People talking about their mental trauma, psychologists coming on there and then addressing that mental trauma. People sharing about Indigenous Day, like all these. I'm learning so much, sometimes from like Gen Zers. Like talk about people that give me hope. Gen Zers, dude. So like not willing to tolerate crappy work conditions, willing to walk away. And they're inspiring millennials and Gen Xers to be like, why are we working so hard? Why am I tolerating this? Look, this Gen Zer is not doing it. I'm going to figure out what I want to do. And, when you see that generation not settling and being like, I'm going to challenge this because it's irrational for me to work 50 to 60 hours a week. It's irrational for me to work 2,500 hours a year. It's irrational for me to be commuting, and giving up, an extra 100 to 200 hours a year to this. Like, it just doesn't make sense. No. It's irrational for me to dress up in a costume and go to work and pretend like I'm happy when I'm not. Like, they're just not for any of that BS. And that's great, because then it's challenging us to be like, well, what's important for us? What actually is important to me? And I think a lot of times we don't ask that question. It's the most simplest question to ask, but it's just like, what do I want? And it's just like, oh, I don't know. But like, that is a curious question you should constantly be asking yourself. What do I want? What do I want right now? What do I want that's going to bring me joy, fulfillment, and make me do the thing that makes me come most alive?
So what's your vision for the future of play?
Ooh, the vision? That's an interesting question. I'll answer it from just the workplace standpoint. We're at a crossroads in the workplace where you have one way, which is more of the Jeff Bezos way, which is like, I'm going to work people to the bone. I am going to exploit workers. I am going to eventually replace them with AI. I don't really care, right? That's one extreme. And then the other extreme is more of like the Tony Hsieh, Zappos one of just like, I care about my staff. I want to bring more joy. I want to have more meaningful work. I want to allow them to actually play and have more ability. What Google did their 20% program back in the day and allowed their staff to play and just pursue stuff that was curious to them for a fifth of the time. That's where all their innovations came from. Google Meet, Google Plus, Google Hangout, like all of these things. So are we choosing this route that is not going to be about humanity, or are we choosing a route that is all about shared humanity? And that's where we're at. So my role in the play world is to help lean, my small part of like whatever effect I and other play people have in changing that long arc of justice towards humanity, and be like, do we really need to be working 40 hours a week? Do we really need to be like, doing all these things that actually don't bring us fulfillment at work, right? And something else that I bring up more and more, which I find fascinating, is like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Mm-hmm. Abraham Maslow. Mm-hmm. He stole that. So he took that from the Blackfoot Nation, an indigenous tribe, and he misinterpreted it. Or maybe at least he didn't write it to completion, right? So Maslow hierarchy of needs has the physiological needs and blah, 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 all the way up to self-actualization, right? But Blackfoot's triangle wasn't a triangle. It was actually a teepee. And on the bottom of that, for Blackfoot's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization is at the bottom. Like, your willingness to understand who you are, how you show up in the world, and how you contribute to the world is at the very bottom. That is the baseline for everything. Right after self-actualization is community actualization, which is, how am I contributing to the community? How are we looking out for one another, right? Like, when they talked about this, like it was an analogy in a village, I think it was like in Nigeria, where it was like, when someone goes through depression, the whole community helps. Okay, why is that person going through depression? Oh, they're not working right now. How come they're not working? Oh, okay, maybe their plow is broke. Okay, well, someone help fundraise for a plow. Oh, they have childcare needs. Okay, someone else in the community helps watch the kids. Like, they do it as a community to help them. So this community actualization of how are we watching out for each other? How are we taking care of the larger group and not just ourselves, right? As like Maslow's hierarchy needs is very individualistic. But then the thing at the top of Blackfoot's hierarchy of needs is cultural perpetuity, which I find so fascinating. It's about breath of life. And it's this idea that by yourself, you're insignificant. If you were just talking about your life on its own, you're very little significance. But also breath of life, which means you have the ability to take everything that your ancestors have, breathe that in and pass on what you think is good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like to let go of some of that historical trauma, to let go of some of those, things, but also embrace the failures and the successes and breathe that into your descendants. You are the link. You are the most important link between your ancestors and your descendants. So it's much bigger than just your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's bigger than anything. And when you're seeing it that way, then like it doesn't seem like, oh my gosh, the world's going to end and then I haven't made anything. It's just like, no, you are actually representing everyone that came before you.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to share everything you learn as well as everything you've learned from them to the next generation and generations to come that are going to affect, people, 5, 6, 7 generations from now. Right?
Yeah.
That's powerful.
It is powerful.
Is amazing when you look at it that way. Instead of looking at it in this individualistic, oh my goodness, I need to post something right now because I need to go viral because when I'm viral, then I'm important, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that.
No.
We're thinking too small. We're just thinking too small.
You were thinking too small, and also we can boil it down. So it's kind of interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking about I was listening to this guided yoga nidra, so like a guided relaxation, and I wish I could remember the guy's name who did it, but he made this. He said in the background, "You exist, you're safe, you belong," and that was just when I think about play, right?
That's it.
Isn't that
That's
something?
it. You exist. You are safe. You belong. I mean, that's all we want, right?
That's all we
just
want.
want to be seen. We just want to be heard, and we just want to be loved, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be asking ourselves, how am I allowing my own self to be seen? How am I allowing myself to be heard? And how am I allowing myself to be loved by others, but more importantly, loved by me? Mm-hmm. Like, what am I doing on a regular basis to give myself joy and love, right? I think we forget about that. I think a lot of times we look to others and be like, give me the love and attention, right? Mm-hmm. And it's never enough. Mm-hmm. It's just never enough. You're never going to get enough likes. You're never going to get enough shares. You're never going to get it's about what do you want to do for you? And do you actually recognize the value that you bring to people? Mm-hmm. Because you do a ton. And I think a lot of times we forget the impact that we have on people's lives. So you should ask.
Easy to forget. Well, easy to forget, but good to remember. And tell us, where can people find you?
Absolutely. So if you want to find my ridiculous videos, you can find me at Jeff Harry Plays, JeffHarryPlays. And that's my handle on everything from LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all that. And then if you want to dive into a coaching session with me and we can figure out how we can use positive psychology and play to help you tackle something that you're really scared to do, but play could be the answer to it, then simply go to rediscoveryourplay.com and click on the Let's Play button. You can set up an appointment with me and we can talk.
Thank you so much, Jeff Harry, for joining us on the Joy Factor today. It was a real pleasure to talk to you.
I loved it. This was so much fun. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you for listening to The Joy Factor. For more information, visit www.thejoyfactorpodcast.com.